If you've been watching X-Men 97, then you've seen Magneto's change of wardrobe, wearing a new costume that is intended to show his turn of a new leaf. A purple sleeveless outfit with a giant M on it, which stands for both Magneto and Mutant. He also no longer wears his helmet, which on the show is said because he no longer needs it to hide his thoughts, which isn't actually the purpose of the helmet in the comics, at least not originally. Instead, that became a concept in the X-Men movies before bleeding back into the comics and into other media, including 97, which in itself is a bit of a mistake, because in the original series, that wasn't a thing. In fact, Charles uses his powers on Magneto while he's wearing the helmet. That being because at that point in canon in the comics, that was yet a thing. Although yet again, I'm probably the only one who noticed. And truth be told, I'm okay with it. Because I do like the idea of it, and I also really like the scene where Magneto talks about it. In fact, it was probably my favorite scene of the entire series so far, so I can't complain, as it showed how vulnerable Magneto really was, especially in that moment. Like the show, Magneto would get his costume in an attempt to look more like a hero, this being after the 1985 Secret Wars event, where Magneto, despite being a villain, would be placed among the heroes when brought to Battleworld, which while he would start off as an outsider of the group, he would soon be accepted, going as far as to join the X-Men, who surprisingly trust him without any real hesitation in this event. I mean, I guess I would trust him over Doom, but still, I do really like this comic. In fact, it was the very first comic I ever read. However, I do think that this is a bit odd for the X-Men to be immediately trusting of Magneto. This is also the comic where Magneto and the Wasp make out. And like I said, this was my first comic ever reading. That moment really left an impression on me when I was 6. For those against Rogue and Magneto, do you prefer the Wasp and Magneto? Because I don't. The first time he ever would appear in this costume would be in X-Men issue 200 from 1985, which is the trial of Magneto, the storyline that would be adapted in the second episode of 97. In fact, some panels and frames are shot for shot, although the comic takes place in Paris and the Fenrir siblings are the villains opposed to being the mutant hate group, which is an upgrade in my opinion because the Fenrir twins are incestuous. No thank you. Storm still has her powers taken away and there's a battle for leadership still. However, Storm herself is also in the running this time around. Magneto would end up both a member of the X-Men and also the New Mutants, forming bonds with many young heroes including Sunspot, who was also in 97, and I assume will return. However, Magneto's past would always catch up to him, and while the X-Men, even Wolverine, would accept him, Wolverine is actually really surprising to me, the Avengers weren't so forgiving, especially since that team included Scarlet Witch, who still had many daddy issues, which I do not blame her for, because she rightfully has those. This would take place in New Mutants issue 40 from 1986, displaying Captain America on the cover fighting Magneto, which is a very cool cover. I would love that as a poster. It's very simple, but it's also really cool. Magneto would end up feeling compelled to go further to protect his new allies and mutants alike, however this included working with the Hellfire Club. This would go as well as you would think, and he'd be kicked out of both teams. The New Mutant one was pretty harsh, as well as it cut the deepest since he was only going this far in these villainous acts for those students who of course didn't see it the same way. Which, to be honest, I think is a little hypocritical considering some of the members on the team at that point. However, I also think that is a fair point at the same time. If you're wondering as to when all this went down, it's a pretty lengthy subplot in the New Mutants comic from issues 38 to 75. Although that includes the setup and the fallout of Magneto's actions as to why it's a decent number of issues. However, it's also a pretty strong subplot, especially for Magneto, as you can kind of see that his old habits are really just that, a habit. Because even when he's trying to be a good guy, he ends up being the bad guy. Magneto would firmly return as a villain again in X Comics in 1989, donning his original costume again. And while this arc didn't last, it was still important, since Magneto would further on work with other X-Men. He would tolerate members of the team. In fact, he would sometimes even care about some of his enemies. Especially Rogue, which will be a future video since seeing it in 97 had me excited. Yes, I'm someone who actually likes that pairing, even if it does sound kinda random. Also, if you're only familiar with the character from the movies, you're probably grossed out. However, in the comics, Rogue is not a teen girl. Instead, she's an adult woman who is presumably in her late 20s. which is still a pretty big age difference, but a much better age difference. Although I feel really bad for Gambit. That last scene where he showed him that he was behind the door and knew what was happening was just heartbreaking. Although I'm very excited to see where it's going. This costume was used pretty briefly, however still made a lasting impression, enough that it's referenced here and there. Although I do wonder as to how long the character will be wearing it on 97, since the show likes to kinda pick and choose what it wants to adapt. For example, the New Mutants are completely removed from this storyline, or at least most of them are, so I do wonder if they're gonna have him go back to being a villain. Which I think both could be interesting, but also could be kinda sad. Because just in these 2 episodes alone, he's made a lot of progress. More than I expected. I thought the character would be going more into an anti-hero route, but no, he's a straight-up hero. I assume he'll likely become a villain again by season's end, or at least starting to kind of turn into a villain again. But until then, I am still really excited for this subplot. Or perhaps it's even the main plot, I don't know. But either way, I am definitely here for it. And that's it. Like always, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!